Welcome to They Talk Funny, episode 39. We're almost into the 40s. I'm here with the fantastic, super cute Asian Vong Show. Vong, how are you doing today?
I'm fabulous. Thank you so much for having me on, Paul. I'm very excited.
It's my pleasure. Like I'm constantly seeing announcements, and I've caught a couple episodes of Rice Asian Comedians podcast that you do.
Thank you.
And it's good. It's very good, and you've been a big supporter of the community, and as well as being a Toronto comedian, somebody definitely to watch. And it is been. You've done Winnipeg as well.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
I, I grew up in
You
Winnipeg.
grew up in Winnipeg, but the Winnipeg
Um,
Comedy Festival.
no, I have not done the Winnipeg Comedy Festival. It's so odd. I've actually never performed in front of my friends and family before. So there's a part of me that kind of feels it's weird. Like I should probably just go do some open mic in Winnipeg just to get it out of the way. Cause now there's such huge pressure. I feel like if I do a homecoming show, it's gotta be because it's been like 15 years now and I've never performed in Winnipeg. It feels like I can't. It's just getting too big now. I need to just pop that burst that bubble soon.
All right, to pop in the bubbles. For anyone who has not seen you, you usually open up with the that you're gay, super cute Asian.
Mhm.
That's one of your lines. But how would you describe your comedy? Like where's your comedy coming from? And anyone that's joining in,
Mm.
remember, just pop into the comments, say hello, say where you're watching from, and if you have a question for Vong, please just pop it into the chat, and we'll bring it on screen.
So I would say my comedy is very much related to my life. It's generally storytelling about my life and my experiences. Because I first got into comedy basically because I didn't see, a lot of representation for the stories of the people that I grew up with. So I think it's important now that I do have a microphone to tell those stories, or at least, my my version of those stories. So I would say that's sort of where my comedy leans into. And yeah, so basically I'm saying I'm an egomaniac and I only talk about myself mainly. Um, and
About 80% of comedians.
and I do want to reference the official spokesperson for Gay Super Cute Asians is that actually came. I don't really use that tagline as much. That was actually created for when I first started out. I was in Alberta,
In
and in Alberta, I needed an opening line to introduce the fact that I was gay. But in Alberta, if you say you're gay, the audience gasps. So it's literally like I'm official spokesperson for gay. They would gasp. Then I would say super cute, and then they would laugh, and it was basically my break the ice because I knew it was like a bigger issue. If I use that line in Toronto, most people are just more like, well, it doesn't really matter. But it was definitely written for Alberta because they will gasp if you don't win them over after saying you're gay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely sad, but I can see how that can be a good icebreaker there. You first did sort of stand up comedy at a speaking engagement. Is that not true?
Yeah, I used to. So I got into comedy while I was in Alberta, but how it started on stage was I used to help organize human rights conferences. And, it doesn't matter if the human rights conference is about like AIDS or cancer or anything. If you're giving a 45-minute talk, you have to be kind of funny to engage the audience. I know that sounds funny, but like even the most, like even the saddest topic, you have to bring some levity to it. So that's how it kind of started. And then somebody saw me in the audience. Actually, it was Mark. I don't even know if he remembers this, but it was Olympic gold medalist Mark Tewksbury. He was our keynote speaker, and he saw me in the audience. He saw me keynote, and he was the one who actually came up to me after the show and was very complimentary and said I should pursue stand-up. And I took his advice, and here we are 15 years later.
15 years later.
Yeah.
All right. I have to point out though, you're a medal winner from the Gay Olympics. You got gold in Seattle. You got bronze in Paris.
Yeah, so it's sort of funny talking about this because I always lean like very close to the that blurred line between confidence and cockiness, and I usually go over. So it's tough for me to talk about this stuff without going over the line because I'm just naturally very confident anyway. But at risk of crossing that line into conceitedness, I was in Cleveland. I was the first person to medal in four separate gay sports. Yeah,
Okay.
and not like like how sometimes like swimmers or track and field you get multiple medals, but it's still
Mhm.
within swimming or track and field. Like these were very separate. It was like volleyball, badminton, tennis, and what was and table tennis.
Table
Um,
tennis. Yeah.
Although I guess people say they're all racket sports other than volleyball. So who knows? Maybe they are similar like swimming, but but yeah, as I said, like, and you can tell by my tagline of super cute. I always have to wrestle with that demon of being being on that conceited side, but still being likable.
S-
But it's
s-
yeah, it's
well,
I think most comedians are pretty conceited. So
there we are. You're just an average comedian. There is,
sorry.
let's face it, the average comedian does not have like four medals at one event, and you got at least one other when you went to for the second Gay Olympics that you went to. How
Oh
many
yeah.
medals in total do you have? I know you didn't. You sort of you're a little disappointed to just have the bronze in
Oh
table tennis, or sorry, it wasn't table tennis and badminton that year,
yes.
but
You know what? Actually, that was the hardest fought medal I've ever had in my life. And I had missed out on, so in volleyball and tennis, I was one match away from getting a medal in those sports as well.
Mhm.
So I had already lost the medal in volleyball, I
Mhm.
lost the medal in tennis, and then I had to go play badminton. And I was like, I cannot lose three medals in one day. And it was crazy. It was like it went to a final set tiebreaker. And I was playing this guy, this Russian guy who was favored to win the whole thing. And yeah, it came down to the last point. And also because I was in Paris, I didn't know anybody. And sure, Paris is far away from Russia, but there's a lot of European sporting events, so you kind of meet each other. So he had
Mhm.
this whole section of people cheering for him. And I'm kind of like playing the villain, playing against this Russian guy. But I'm like, no, I'm not going to lose three medals in the span of 2 days. And I just sort of barely hung on. Like I've got some of the photos on my blog, and like you can see my face. Like it looks like I'm half dead, but it was so it was so worth it.
So your blog is accessed at vongshow.com
Yes.
for
Yeah.
anyone that's interested. We're gonna, yeah, I might as well put this up. You're also Vong Show on Twitter and Instagram. See, you were talking about the inspiration being storytelling, that you were a
Mhm.
storytelling type style. You have lived a life. Like these are stories that people are interested to hear about. That's having your point of view is, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, I think too, like when I was growing up, a lot of the comedy was more observational, and it was about connecting with people because you have shared interests, like Seinfeld, Ellen. It's very much the
Right.
observational humor. You're going to understand me because we have shared experiences. And I feel like comedy sort of changed, and where my comedy went more, and don't get me wrong, I love Ellen, I love Seinfeld, I love that whole era.
Mhm.
But I do think with comedy, you kind of get counter eras. So it sort of went from that to I think where it is now, and where I sort of took my comedy, which is, no, we haven't been through the same experiences. You have no idea what it's like to be gay Asian from the ghetto, but hopefully I can take you on this ride in this journey. So it's almost like, you know, the counter type of comedy to what came before, which I feel like is what happens in comedy. It's sort of cyclical. It kind of the next generation kind of counters the previous generation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do. There is like I have a term for it because it like at that time they were having people to sort of acknowledge and agree with the situation. So it was situational observational comedy, and now I think even despite differences, when people have these stories that they're sharing,
Yeah,
it's not. There's still the emotions are involved. There's still the emotions that people can connect with, and I call that
yeah.
emotive context
Mm.
for the style of comedy, and that's where people are connecting with each other and seeing the humor because they might not understand the situation, but everyone's been angry, everyone's been sad, everyone's been frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of my comedy that has been the most successful have been the kinds that weren't really written for a mass audience, and I wouldn't think people would actually want to hear about it, but then it ends up being the type that people like the most. Like I do this whole bit about my volleyball team, my gay
Hmm.
volleyball team, and we're called the Super Power Bottoms, and it's like it was written for gay pride, and it's very specific to a gay audience, but for some reason that is the comedy sketch that sort of resonates with a mainstream audience when it's probably my only comedy set that I wrote specifically for a
For
niche
pride, for
audience.
yeah.
Like it literally was not for anybody outside of gay pride. um, which it was the first time I ever did anything like that, because I started out my comedy in Alberta. So I never performed in front of like an all gay audience or an all Asian audience until like 10 years into my career. So I had never written anything specifically for a niche audience until that. And then that was the thing that sort of resonated with a mainstream audience. It's sort of like you said, it is more about the emotion of it than sometimes trying to relate exactly the same experiences.
Do you think that's because you felt freer in the writing, that you were able to expose yourself a little bit more, and thus the emotions were rawer in what you were presenting?
Yeah, I think so. I think you know, it's funny because in Alberta, and I actually I love starting out my comedy career in Alberta. It was a very supportive community, but sort of like what I said about my tagline, there needed to be a bit more context, a bit more of an explanation, which, as you know, in comedy, the more setup that you have, the more exposition, it
Hmm.
really weighs down the jokes. And I think with Super Power Bottoms, or with some of the material that I write for an Asian audience, it's I take away all the explanations and I just get deep into it, and I just assume and if you don't know, that's too bad, because the assumption is if you're a gay pride, I'm not going to explain what being gay is because half the audience will yell at me for explaining it. So I think probably that's what resonated, was I just sort of went for it without having to give those explanations or context. And it's sort of like, letting people research it afterward if they need to. Whereas in Alberta, I did very carefully. I was like, no, I need to explain these concepts. They
Hmm.
don't know. Like even more so in Alberta, it wasn't even more so about like being gay or Asian, but it was like me growing up poor, like below the poverty line in Winnipeg. Like you really have to explain that to people in Alberta, because at that time there's like an oil boom and everybody was rich. So,
Yeah.
you always have to bring in context. And I would say that's probably why it resonated more, was like it just took out a lot of my setup and exposition.
Yeah, it helped the word economy, the fact that you had,
Yes.
but the thing is, it's even without the setup and exposition, it's still working with audiences that you didn't expect it to.
Mm-hmm.
Which, yeah, so I guess there's a tendency with a lot of comedians to write to the LCD, the lowest common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
But I still find the the jokes that people come back to me or mention or will shout out
Yeah.
to me on the street are the ones that I write kind of more for me, as in I have
Yeah.
it. It might divide the audience a little bit or not. I don't mean divide as in like some people hate it, some people love it. I mean, some people get it and they really get it, and others are
Mm-hmm.
left in the dark. Um, I think that kind of makes that connection with the audience members when they feel like they're special because they understood.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've been really lucky. There's been a turning point in my career, probably about 3, 4 years ago, where I started producing my own shows. And the difference was when I first started in comedy, I was doing, the regular method, going through the club circuit. This was out west. And you do these clubs, you're doing shows where people don't know who you are. So you do kind of feel like you have to do lowest common denominator, or you're doing these corporate shows, and there's this responsibility to bring the audience with you. But once I
Mhm.
started producing my own shows, once people came knowing who I was before they get in the door, that's also helped that I don't have to give those explanations anymore. It's like, if you don't know who I am, then you probably came with somebody who does, who will just explain it to you later, because you're not just going to randomly go to like a show produced by me where you don't know who I am. That really does help the comedy for sure.
Just to kind of back up and keep with the theme of the show about
Mhm.
the comedy and the comedy writing, where you find your inspiration is from your life,
Yeah.
but do you have a discipline or to your writing? Do you?
Yeah. So for me, I find it very difficult to be funny when I'm sitting down to write. So for me, what happens is I get these moments where I have a really funny thought and then I write it down. When I first started comedy, it was in a notebook, wherever I was, and now it's just on my phone. And I'm a little bit overboard with databases and such. My background is in engineering, so I
Mhm.
have like this whole weird tagged database of all my thoughts and stuff. So then what I do when I actually sit down to write is more to organize. So say if it's I guess the most recent show is recent being being subjective here, but my last big show was last year for Chinese New Year. And so what I did was I then went into my database, took everything was that was tagged as Asian material,
Mhm.
and then I looked at all that, and then I just organized it in the best way. So for me, when I'm sitting down and actually quote unquote writing, I'm not trying to be funny. All the jokes are already in the database. It's more writing the transitions and figuring out like the overall narrative arc, of how these jokes all fit together, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense because like when you're doing a longer show, having that through line
Yeah.
to carry the audience through is very helpful. It makes it a show more than just a collection of jokes.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to writing, you're saying that you write down the ideas, but when do you flesh them out? Are you one of those people that writes on stage, or do you kind of talk
No.
to yourself? Or
I definitely don't write on stage. I'm sort of, I always give this analogy, because I do a monthly show called Fresh, where we sort of mentor like new comedians within like the first 6 months. And this is just my opinion after doing comedy for 15 years. And a lot of people have different opinions, but I find there's like two distinct types of comedians. As far as writing, obviously these are very broad strokes, and I always
Mhm.
say both ways are very valid, very correct. There's lots of people who've been successful both ways, but I call it more like the Google method versus the Apple method. Like the Google method is, it's sort of like that writing on stage, where it's a lot of trial and error. You write 100 jokes, you throw it out, and you sort of keep like the five best, and you just rinse and repeat, keep doing that. And I would say that's like 80% of comedians. And
Mhm.
then I'm more in the other camp, where I call like, the Apple comedians. And obviously Google and Apple are very successful companies. So I'm not throwing shade at anybody who does it the Google way. Like, trust me, Google is very successful. And so the Apple method is more like Steve Jobs, where he basically said with the iPhone, he's like, people don't know what you want until you show it to them. So that's sort of me. Like I almost write more like a playwright. Like I
Mhm.
go away, I finish like a half hour, and then I present it all, and then I might change like 5% of it. And that's it.
Mhm.
Because for me, it's like, this is the art that I'm putting out there. And, for me, listening to the audience would be akin to listening, like if I was an artist, and put my art in an art gallery, and then I listen to the people who came to the gallery. Like, I don't really
Right.
care. And I know that's like an exclusionary way of thinking of it, and I know that's why I always present the other way, the Google method, where I'm like, it's very valid. I'm not throwing shade. It's very successful. Most comedians who are successful do it the other way, but I'm definitely more like I'm in my secret lab, and here it is. Like like
Vong
last
Show, a
year,
mad scientist.
yeah, like last year for the so last year we filmed a concert film for Chinese New Year at CBC Studios, and like the crazy thing was 30% of that material I'd never done on stage before. I was just that confident. I was like, no, this is the occasion. These are the jokes that I need to fill out this set, and I wrote it and I literally performed it for the first time. This is not something I would recommend. I think it does take being in comedy for a while. I
Yeah.
just had that confidence. But yeah, so to answer your questions, I would say I'm the opposite of writing on stage. Also, too, growing up, I had like a bit of a speech impediment. I think you can see sometimes, like even in this interview, I'll like pause on words because there's certain letters, especially words that begin with the letter S, that I'll just pause and I just need like a moment for my brain to reboot.
Hmm.
So for me, I actually write everything out like by the syllable, and I need to like pronounce it in my head multiple times, and I remove any word that I think will trip up my delivery, because as you know, with comedy, if you stutter at the wrong time, there goes the whole punchline. So
Yeah.
it's very methodical, and for me probably it has to be because of that speech impediment.
I noticed that we have a number of people are tuning in. If you like talking about comedy, please click like on this. I'm talking with Vong Show, comedian of 15 years, currently based out of Toronto. Has performed across Canada. If you have any questions for us, please just drop it into the chat so we can bring it on to the screen with us here. I like how you what you just described. I like to write out a lot before I go on stage, but I'm also very interactive. So I
Mm,
take a lot from the audience as I'm doing it. Um, I recently had
yeah.
Chris Fonseca on the show,
Mm,
who is a comedian with cerebral palsy,
mm,
and for him, practicing his diction ahead of time
mm,
helps with his clarity in performing. And
mm,
so he kind of really has to know it's a little bit harder for him to go off the cuff.
yeah.
So I had a speech impediment as a kid as well, and so
Mm,
fully know about going to the speech therapist. Getting that
mm,
special class in elementary
yeah.
to work on it. Yeah, losing recess for crying out loud.
Yeah, you know what? I definitely know that like being overly scripted can be not great for comedy, and I know that I lean more heavily in that direction. But before the January taping, I started taking an improv class for like a whole year, and I started hosting, which I've never hosted comedy because, as you know, Paul, like there's certain comedians whose styles are just better as not the host, and I was very self-aware because I'm very pre-scripted, plus it's storytelling based, so it just doesn't work if you break out the chunks, so I'd always avoided it. But I was like, no, for an occasion that big, I can't just close my eyes and pretend that these people aren't there. I have to use the environment in a way I never have. So yeah, for a whole year, I was hosting and taking improv classes. So I do try and incorporate, what's in the room, but it's definitely not natural to me. It is not like I appreciate, like, as you know, Paul, some of these comedians out west famously do the stream of consciousness thing where they don't even know what they're going to say before they go on stage. I can't imagine. It's amazing.
There's some stream of consciousness guys who are scripted. It's just they're skilled at hiding it.
Mm,
Uh, but I'm not dropping names on that. But that's if you work with them like several shows in a row, you
mm,
realize that it's like they've memorized a song that's just coming out.
yeah.
Uh, but no, that's a brilliant observation that you had, and the fact that you were 10 years in without going into to hosting without going, into breaking it out and recognizing that's a skill set that you wanted to have, that you got into the improv as well as were practicing hosting before, like doing a big gig. Um, Shows definitely intelligence in how you're approaching the art. Now, the comparison from Canada to the U.S. In the
Hmm.
U.S., especially in the southern U.S., it's they usually have the person with the least amount of experience host,
Oh, what a
which
disaster.
is yeah, I know, which is it's sort of been a Canadian thing, and believe it or not, it was a thing that sort of came from Yuck Yucks. Yuck Yucks were the ones to first kind of that, to my knowledge, impose it. And I think the book, I don't see it close to my hand, Standing in the Dark, which is Andrew Clark's book about the history of stand-up comedy in Canada, mentioned the fact that it was adopted by some, like, in the States and tours, but it's very much a Canadian thing, that you go from being an open mic to an opener, to a middle to a host kind of in Canada,
Yeah.
which is great. Now, you got into producing after,
Yeah.
you said, about 3 years ago.
Yeah, just about 3 years ago. Yeah, probably only 2.5 years ago, really. Well, actually, I'll clarify. I did produce before for Comedy Cares, which is an organization that I started. We partner comedians and charities to raise money for worthy causes. So I did produce that, but that was like in combination with Can West, and it was just like a whole bigger thing. So I kind of don't count that as producing, because that was like a whole machine behind it. You've got like an
Mhm.
event team and whatever, and also it wasn't like it wasn't my face on the poster or anything. It's like Comedy Cares, you're raising money for things. So when I say I started producing like 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, I mean it's the first time where I decided, I'm going to put my name out there, and either people are going to come or not come based on my name and my face. And as you know, in comedy, it's very scary, because for the first 10 years of my career, it was, when you're touring or doing clubs or corporate gigs, they don't know who you are.
No.
And in some ways that's comforting. But I sort of, and I'll tell you, even after 12 years, when I first started producing, and that first show, I didn't you just don't know if people are going to show up. If there's not the big Yuck Yuck's name, or Just for Laughter, if there's not
Mhm.
or Comedy Cares or another name to bring people in, will they come just for your name and your face? And I'm telling you, that first show, I was like, I I was so scared. And this is after 12 years. I was like, will somebody even come based on my name? Because
Yeah.
that's the only thing you're selling it on. And so, yeah, it was really scary. I'll tell you that. I was really, really scared that first show.
Yeah, I like to say that there's four skills that a comedian has to know, and there's writing, there's performance, there's stagecraft, which I consider different than performance,
Mhm.
and then there's production, or
Mhm.
promotion. Sorry,
Mhm.
which a lot of comedians don't think about, because I mean it's probably good that they're not thinking about it, because if they're really good at promoting themselves before they're capable
Yep.
to deliver on what they promote, then it's not good. But there's so many comedians that seem to be stunted, like great comedians who seem to be stunted with the promotion, and it is that scary thing. It's that new skill set that you were learning.
Mhm.
Um, and was this so after the Comedy Cares, was that the show at the Rivoli, the first?
No, so the first show was at oh my goodness, I'm drawing a total blank. The the theater that's above the Black Swan. The
The SoCap,
yes, it's a
Social Capital
SoCap.
Theater.
Yeah, so
Social Capital Theater in Toronto. Here I am in Montreal, and all right.
I don't know. It's one of those days. I've produced so many shows there. I don't know why that's sort of
Shout out
breaking
to
my
Ralph
brain.
McLeod at the SoCap, by the way. Uh,
Oh yeah, he's amazing to work with. I feel so bad that I forgot their name. They're a wonderful venue, wonderful to work with.
yes.
I
Yeah.
produced a show there called What Up Toronto,
Mhm.
And it was, like I said, it was basically my face on the poster. What up, Toronto is my greeting on stage. It's usually the first thing I say on stage, like, what up, Calgary, what up, Toronto, whatever.
Mhm.
So it's as personalized a show as you can get because it's literally titled after
Your
what comes out of my
opening
mouth
line.
on stage. Yeah, and so I produced that, and then the day of the show, it was, I'm not sure if you'll remember this from like 3 Januaries ago. It was, they called it the snowpocalypse. It was like
Oh.
the biggest blizzard in Toronto history in like 200 years, and it literally happened on the day of the show. And I was already nervous. I was like, what is going to happen? Nobody's going to show up. Um, and amazingly, we sold out that venue, and it just sort of taught me sometimes you have to take that leap. And even if it totally failed, it would have been the right leap because at least I tried. But
Mhm.
um, and then after that, this is where the overconfidence comes from that I talk about later. But you know, after selling out that one show, I was like, okay, now I'm ready for the Rivoli. And then literally the next month we moved to the Rivoli, which is like, the capacity is like triple. And I
Yeah.
was like, and so my friends were like, okay, whoa, I think you're feeling yourself a little bit. You're moving from social capital to Rivoli. This is like your second show ever. But ever since then, and then the Rivoli worked out really well. And then since then, I just kept, taking more and more risk. And it's really worked out. And I think sometimes I would say for that whole year of producing, um, every show was another risk. And because I just kept pushing myself, um, as far as venues and show size and all that, um, there's like, there's this extra energy that you put out because you kind of have to. Otherwise, the investment could just totally blow up in your face. And it's sort of that nervous energy that sort of helped propel my growth that year because I'll tell you, every show I was nervous it was going to blow up in my face because it just steadily grew from social capital all the way to last January show at the CBC. And we did two shows. So that was like going from selling like, $8 tickets for a 40-seat venue to selling $75 tickets at the CBC for two shows that's like 700 people within like a year and a half. It just like I just kept upping the stakes to a point where like I always felt like if I wasn't shitting myself, then I wasn't pushing myself enough. And then of course the COVID happened, and now I sort of get to take I would say a well-deserved break. But yeah, I was trying to push myself in producing the way I had pushed myself in the art of comedy, but I
Mhm.
was I was always safer on the production side. But in comedy, I'd always pushed myself to sort of explore the fringes of the art and pushing the audience a bit more. And I wanted to have that type of artistic recklessness, but like apply it to the marketing side of it or the production side.
That is, I like the fact that you said that you're sitting on your hands because of COVID as well. But it is that pushing. I think it shows a great work ethic. That the fact that you are doing that and you are recognizing where you were needing to get better, and you got better at it, and you got bigger at it, and you kept on pushing yourself, which is fantastic. But you've not been exactly sitting on your hands during COVID. Did you had you started your podcast prior to COVID? No.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. I had been focused the whole year previous to COVID. It was literally all it was all working toward that concert film because that's literally my entire life savings was going to that concert film. So like every show at the Rivoli for that whole year was literally, and I love the Rivoli. So each of the shows
Mm.
were its own thing, but it was basically to grow an audience so that I would have enough of a mailing list to be able to do a bigger venue.
Yeah.
So literally every show at the Rivoli and at Cameron House and at the Social Capital Theater literally was just to build up my mailing list. So I was focused purely on that concert film. And I'll tell you, Paul, if that if COVID had broken like a month earlier, because I think the shutdown was in March, and our show was like end of January, and people are already talking about COVID. Um, if they had shut down before me, I can't even tell you, Paul. I might be in a coma. Like it was 18 months of planning. If that show had to be shut down, I don't even know. I don't even know. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, so you know the with the podcast, the that sort of came about because I'd always known that I wanted to push into two other areas,
Mhm.
which was podcasting and YouTube.
Right.
Because it was sort of like this three pronged strategy I had started. The first of which was to own my audience more, to be able to sell shows and have that mailing list, and so that was sort of its own thing. Um, and then I wanted to reach a broader audience um, because doing the shows, you know, I'm based out of Toronto,
Mm.
and you know, I probably spend. The idea was to spend, you know, um, maybe 3 months out of the year in New York. So I could sort of build in Toronto and New York with this strategy, but you can't really tour based on like producing shows in one city. Like you just can't grow exponentially enough. So for me, I was like, well, basically there's YouTube and there's podcasting. Like that's the way to reach a broader audience with my material than to see who likes that material and to start to tour in those cities. So I would say the the um as you can see, my speech impediment is coming back when I'm not pre-scripted. But with the podcast, it was just about, here's the opportunity with the pandemic where all my monthly shows are canceled. Now let's try this whole new thing. Um, and it was crazy. I don't even know what to tell you. Like this support from the community and from like the media was crazy. Like when we got so I think we had launched the podcast. We were only like 4 episodes in, and then we were approached by Spotify for like a co-marketing deal. And it just so happened that, you know, so we started in March. And we weren't doing weekly shows, and we are still experimenting. And then they approached us in April, and they said that they were wanting to promote Asian comedians during Asian Heritage Month, which is May. And then next thing you know, like we're 2 months into a podcast, May comes, and they put us on that giant billboard in Dundas Square. And I was just like, you know, this podcast just blew up so quickly. I couldn't even have imagined. Sometimes you just put something out in the world and it catches fire. Um, and
Is
you know,
Rice Asian comedians? Is
yes.
that yes?
Yeah, so it's funny because there's two podcasts. So there's Rice Asian Comedians, which is more of like a talk show format where it's the same panelists every week, and we just share the Asian perspective on like entertainment culture and trending topics. And there's another podcast called Gaysian, which is just me interviewing people. So that's more of like an interview format. And at first, it was the same podcast where we had like where we had guests every week. Plus, we are talking about different things, and I just felt like it was confusing the audience. So I sort of separated them. I was like, no, this is a permanent panel show. And then this is an interview show. So it just sort of helped to differentiate the two shows a little bit more. Um, and then yeah, and then with Spotify, they saw that I had an LGBTQ podcast as well. So then the next month after May, obviously it was June, Pride Month, and then they picked up the Gaysian podcast for another co-marketing deal, and then they put that up on the billboard too. So it was just like it was just, honestly it was crazy. Yeah, and I super appreciate Spotify is amazing. I'll just shout out to the entire marketing team at Spotify for their support and for elevating underrepresented voices during those months, and I've certainly benefited. So
Yeah,
thank you thank you very much, Spotify. um,
congratulations on that. I've just um, I have something in the works called I Do YouTube Wrong,
hmm,
about the process that I'm going through now, because I had one channel, but I had three very different niche shows on those
Mm,
channels, on that channel, and I've just recently split them up, which
mm.
means it's almost like starting over again on YouTube, which is hard. With Spotify's help, I don't how it wasn't that hard, kind of juggling two different channels or two different podcasts at the same time.
No, well, with Spotify, it was more like it was on the marketing side. So they just took like I don't know what their marketing spend was, but it was a lot. Like I was seeing these ads, not just on the billboard, but like it was these ads were like following me anywhere I went on the internet, and it wasn't just me. It was like people taking screen grabs and then
Sending them to you. Yeah.
yeah, sending them to me. And it was just, I don't know, it was to be able to launch a podcast with that type of marketing support, which, as you know, in comedy, I'm a full-time comedian. I don't have a day job. So it's like outside of comedy. So it's like, I don't have money to put into these, uh, giant media launches. But sure, if another company wants to pay to plaster my face everywhere, I'm very I'm very willing to do whatever they need me to do. So yeah, yeah, that just came out of pure luck. And
Work and talent. You had the work ethic. You were consistently putting out good quality. That's what they recognized, and that's what they wanted. I mean, a lot of people, it might be lucky to be in front of the right person at the right time, but you were consistently putting out good quality stuff, and you had the work ethic showing that you were doing that. And that's one of the things that a lot of these non-creative, more, those companies, that's what they're looking for. So
yeah.
you had the right package.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Plus, I will say, part of my strategy was, I knew where their offices was. I also did this with CTV too, which is what helped me get on some interviews on CTV. Was I started this postering campaign, and with my posters, it's always just a poster of my face making different facial expressions, and I sort of knew the entrance that the producers would go through, so I would, for like a whole year, I was just postering my face in like I was like, you're gonna see my face twice every morning for a year, walking into your office. And I did that for Spotify, for CBC, and for the CTV offices. And I just kept postering my face. And I was hoping subliminally it would just, at one point, they're gonna have to ask, who is this crazy person with their posters that are entrance every day. So
Just at least you weren't sneaking into the building and putting them over the urinals in the company restroom. Uh,
hey, if I had access, I probably would have done that too.
ah. All right. Okay. Now you are also. I mean, part of what got you doing the Chinese New Year
Yep.
show at CBC was you did the Rice Asian Comedians Festival, which it was supposed
Mhm.
to be just one show at first. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it was for Asian Heritage Month. And what I learned was, and this doesn't sound very biased, but I promise you, I've been in comedy for 15 years. I never would have said this in any other part of my career, but I put in the submissions for Asian comedians for the Asian Heritage Month show, and I was just like, probably my five favorite comedians in all of Canada right now are Asian. And I was like, when is this ever going to happen again in my life? I don't know if I've ever had more than, probably like with Ron Jossel, he was always in my top five.
Yeah.
So like maybe one out of my top five was Asian. But I was like, this is a crazy amount of Asian talent. So I was like, we need to do something together before these comedians, be they become famous and move away. I was like,
Yeah.
what, when are we going to get another chance? So that's where we came up with the plan. So just stepping back, so we had the first show. It was like, huge hit. Rivoli sold out, probably over capacity. Somehow we probably fit in like close to 200 people into the Rivoli. It was completely crazy. And then what we decided was that's when we made the plan to really push for the Chinese New Year show. And so the idea was I was going to take that initial group of comedians, and at the first show they each only got like 10 minutes each, because it was sort of all of us. So then
Hmm.
what we did was, starting in the fall, I produced 5 Fright shows. Each comedian got to headline one of those shows, and it was just sort of 5 months in a row. Each of those comedians would do 30 to 45 minutes. And then we would all come together. All the headliners would come together for the Chinese New Year show, and each have a half hour on that show. So it's going to be like a supersized show.
Yeah.
So I sort of called the plan. It was sort of like our version of the of like of use my stutter again, of Marvel's The Avengers, where
Right.
it was like, we each got our solo movie, and now we're gonna come together. So it
For the
made
end game. Yeah.
yeah, so it made the Chinese New Year show feel really special, because it's like, this is literally the 5 headliners that we just had all coming together for one show. And plus I had to somehow justify that $75 ticket price. I was like, we're charging more than comedians who are coming through town. Like I remember we were charging more than what it costs to watch to go to the Hannah Gadsby show, and her show was like maybe a few weeks after. So I was like, somebody would really see, like, am I going to pay more money to go see unknown Canadians, or go see an international superstar from Netflix? So
Yeah.
like, we really had to justify the ticket price. So it really was that idea of like, yeah, like you said, our end game, our Infinity War. Here's like everybody coming together. And yeah, and with, I mentioned Ron Jossel before. He actually flew in from LA to host the show, because I was like, he was such an inspiration for me when I was first starting comedy. Um, and I was like, to introduce this new generation of 4 comedians. I said 5, but 5 is including Ron. So it's like, to introduce this new generation of Asian headliners in Canada. I was like, the only host I can get is Ron. I was like, Ron, you need to come from LA. I don't care what it's going to take. We There's nobody else who can host this show. Like, I don't know. I need to beg, borrow, steal, plead, whatever has to happen. We need Ron Jossel. I like, literally, there's nobody else in my brain that could possibly host that show.
Yeah. No. Have you ever heard from Ron the story about the first time he did? It was, I think it was in L.A., but he did a Filipino comedy
Hmm.
show with just nothing but Filipino comics.
No, no, I haven't heard that story.
Oh, okay. Well, he was headlining it, and by the time he went on, he realized, like, this was early in his career. He realized that most every topic that he was planning on cover had been done. Uh, and it made him a better comic, because he went back to write to get everything
Mm,
much more personal, and it just elevated. Like, I mean, he was a very funny comic before that, but then afterwards, it just took him
mm.
miles higher.
Yeah, no,
Wow.
Ron, his comedy is just so superb on so many levels. And sort of similar to what Ron's saying, like, seeing so much quality in the Asian comedians in Toronto really did help to inspire me to write some more as well. The one thing is, I didn't have quite the same situation with Ron, because the 4 comedians. So it was me, it was Cassie Cow, it was Leonard Chan, and it was Jennifer Shung. And the lucky thing is, although we're Asian, we're quite different in our
Different
styles.
perspectives.
Yeah,
Yes.
very different. Jennifer has a lot of physical humor. She also, she's a mom, and her comedy is uniquely hers with her housewife
Mm.
perspective. Cassie is the youngest. She's got an improv background. She's got this really unique, youthful perspective that, me being so jaded, having performed for so long, I don't have that fresh perspective anymore. Leonard is like this intellectual, as you know, Leonard, like he's so intellectual. He's talking about like world issues and like trade bans and all this stuff. So like there was and obviously me with like gay volleyball and different things like it wasn't really there was no risk of like say Leonard talking about gay volleyball. So it's like it's very we were very fortunate in that way that we didn't trip over each other at all. And that was one of the proudest things with the different reviewers that came out, because in Toronto the stand-up community has a bit of a fraught relationship with the people who review stand-up comedy, because usually
Hmm.
they review theater, and not so much live comedy. So the
And they
reviews.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes they feel punished being sent to see a comedy show. Uh,
Yeah, and so, luckily, like I said, my writing style is more of a playwright anyway. So we're really fortunate that the reviews came out and they were, well, first of all, the fact that they covered us was
mm,
amazing, because they don't always cover stand-up comedy. And then the reviews, what I love the most is how they said that, it was, they really liked the different perspectives that we showed, and how every comedian was so distinct, even within that segment of being Asian, and that was the common theme. But each of our topics were just completely off the wall.
mm. And when the after the first like Rice Asian shows, there was 80 submissions to participate.
Oh my goodness, yes, there were 80 submissions. I didn't even know there was that many Asian comedians in Toronto, to tell you the truth. And I felt bad, because like for so much of as you know, as a comedian, you face a lot of rejection, but it's even harder if you're facing rejection from like a smaller community. Because it feels like if you're Asian and you can't even get on a show for Asian Heritage Month, I was just like, if I'm a young comedian, I would feel crushed. Like not only being rejected by the comedy community, but I'm being rejected by the Asian comedy community. Like, well, what's going on here? So what we did was we started different shows. So for the people who didn't make it on, I did a show called Asian and Funny. And we did that at the Social Capital Theater. And it was weekly during Asian Heritage Month that year. And so literally everybody who submitted like got on. It was marketed in a different way than Rice was.
Mm.
And rightfully so, because it's, I hadn't seen most of these comedians. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, it really formed this connection. And now we have like a Facebook group. We do like weekly writing groups. We have other shows together. And then what happened was, so for the concert film at the CBC, we actually took a group of 10 of the newer comedians who'd only been doing it for less than 2 years, and so we did a show called Fresh Rice. And so they only had 5 minutes on stage, because they're just so new at it.
Mm.
And we worked with them for 3 months. Me, Leonard, Jennifer, and Cassie just helped mentor the new Asians. And yeah, we
Brilliant.
made sure they had 5 minutes. And they got an experience to perform at a really big venue. Like it took me 15 years to get to that venue, so for them to get there in within
In
like
under
their
two
first six
years.
months,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was it was a great thing. And we're actually going to be releasing that as a web series starting on April Fool's Day for 8 weeks. So it goes from April into Asian Heritage Month in May. And yeah, so that's sort of like the prelude to the concert film will be this web series. It's a newer comedians, and those are like 5 minute webisodes.
See, I knew that of you as a comedian. I knew of you as a producer. I knew of you as like a fundraiser for charity and communities. Knowing that you're also working as a mentor, um, I if it wasn't for how bad my hair is, I'd be hats off to you. It's brilliant. You're somebody who's giving back to the community in so many ways. This is probably a weird time to mention this, but I just noticed your post today about Tim Connolly. Uh,
Yes, yes.
I should have looked this up. He did a CBC Comics back in the day. Like I think it was a comics or comedy, one of the early comedy nows. But he's been a traveling a face of Canadian comedians for a long time, and you have. If you go to the vongshow.com, is that the best place to find out the information for donating, or is it
I think
you posted it on your Instagram?
I posted it on my Twitter
On
and on my
Twitter.
Facebook. I don't think on Instagram because there's no
Okay.
clickable link on Instagram. But
Right.
yeah, he's he's going through some medical issues. Not all of which are being covered by by Health Canada or Health Ontario, whatever it's called.
Among it,
Or
a series of microstrokes. So yeah.
yeah, and he's honestly he was so supportive of me when I first moved to Toronto. I knew him before. He's the first person I knew from Toronto. When I moved to Toronto, he helped me get settled. He's an amazing person. Anything you could help to donate, he's really worthwhile. He's been going through quite a few different medical issues, and certainly during this time, I know a lot of people are having difficulty with finances. So
Mm.
obviously only if you have the finances, but yeah, I do think with the community and the comedy community, they've been great with supporting different comedians, because like comedians don't have healthcare and all this kind of crazy outside of Canadian healthcare, of course, but
Right. But
not like
it's not
privatized
recognized
healthcare.
as an art form by the Canadian government yet. So one of the things, if you don't have the funds to actually donate yourself, you can go to at Vong Show on Twitter and retweet the appeal for funds for
Yeah.
Tim Connolly. I highly recommend doing that. Like, my show is run off of donations. I'm not running donations now, so anyone who would like to put any donations, go to Vong Show on Twitter, and you'll see the links that you can donate to Tim Connolly's health fund. That's probably one of the best things to do. Now, we've been talking for an hour already, and we haven't even got into the normal last third of the show. This question has come up because I saw some of your branding. Some of your branding is riced East Asian comedians.
Mhm.
Do your regular shows include West Asian as well, or are you going to be doing a separate branding for them?
So okay, so it's funny because with rice, I swear to God, anytime I post something about rice, the first comment is always, what do you mean by Asian? Like, it is literally, if you look at even all my promo posts, whenever I'm like asking for submissions, it's always, what do you mean by Asian? What do you mean by Asian? So so thank you for the opportunity to let me clarify. So for me, Asian is geographically Asian. So if on the map it says you're part of Asia, um, then we'll
So
take like
Russians can submit as well, and
I was gonna say actually the one exception might be because I know like with Sochi, Russia, where Maria Sharapova is from. I would say if you look like Maria Sharapova, maybe I might be like, okay, I don't know if the Maria Sharapovas of the world are gonna make it on Rice. But with that caveat, like for instance, we've had on comedians from Egypt,
Mhm.
and I didn't even realize 2% of Egypt is in Asia. So somebody had to educate me because as people know, Egypt is a part of Africa. So at first I was like, no, Egypt's not part of Asia. And then I got fact checked and I was like, okay, 2% of Egypt is in Asia. So I'm a man of my word. Apparently I am uninformed, but Egypt is part of Asia, 2%. So you just made it in. But yeah, so anything like we've had, people from South Asia, from, we've we've had people from Iran, we've had people from India. So yeah, it's definitely not just East or Southeast Asian. Yes,
Brilliant.
all of Asia except for Sochi.
Yeah. Now, one of the reasons you got into starting the podcast and all that is because of the lockdown, because of the spread of COVID,
Hmm.
and the fact that touring and being on stages is not. I mean, I'm in Montreal, the one of the worst hit cities in Canada, and we have a curfew of 8 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Right now. Let alone the idea of bars have only been open for maybe 3 weeks since March 17th. Um, it's been pretty heavy here. Um, you started doing your podcast. There's been a great growth in online shows
Hmm.
since then. Are you participating in online stand up shows, or are you keeping it to like your podcast or interview shows or like panel shows?
I have done online shows probably earlier in the pandemic. It's kind of funny because I'm trying to answer this in a way that doesn't diminish what other people are doing. Because I think it's great that there's these online shows. It's just I see comedy and mediums a little bit differently. I feel like when you have when a new medium opens up, I feel like you have to create content for that medium as opposed to trying to translate what you did to that medium. So for me, it was more about opening up my eyes and less about how do I translate what I'm already doing into a digital medium, and more thought about the medium itself and being like, okay, this is an opportunity. What are the benefits of this opportunity? As an artist, how can I paint on this new canvas? So I sort of like wipe the slate clean. So as opposed to thinking of how do I translate my stand up into a digital form, it was like, what is the canvas of digital media allow artistically, and sort of started from there. And for me, the one thing I really thought about is, my value proposition isn't exactly just about the jokes. The jokes are how it translated onto stage because that's the format of stand-up comedy. But I would say more my value proposition to my audience is my perspective, my view on things. So with a podcast and with a YouTube format, that just allows me in a different way to get out those viewpoints, in a different structure, in a different format than stand up. So like I'm still working on my stand up. I'm still writing. I have a lot of material for when it comes back, but I do kind of feel like stand up itself works better um, in that format, and I haven't really tried to translate it. I just more tried to use the digital format for everything it's good for, if that makes sense. At least I was trying to answer that in a way that doesn't throw shade, because I love that people are still producing. I love that they're still performing. It just
I
I just see the art form in a little bit of a different way.
I have to agree. I envy the people that feel comfortable performing like that. I just personally I need to sort of feel or have that feedback from a live audience, which very few shows. Some shows enable you to do that, uh, but I just I'm never quite on the same level of the game when I don't have that live feedback. But
Yeah.
I had a live game show which I was able to
Hmm.
translate to the web, and it's been doing great. So for those of you, next Monday night, it's once a month. We do BattleCom. It's the Geek War of comedy game shows.
Hmm.
It's a microfast debate where people punch each other in the face with jokes, and you decide who wins. So it's a debate where people. I'm over explaining. I'm advertising for my own show on my own show, which is weird. Uh, what do you think about the future? Do you think when um, actually I just kind of an analogy kind of clicked to me is live music, right?
Hmm.
Live music didn't go away when people started doing music videos,
Hmm.
right? And I think music videos sort of grew out of the fact that just watching a videotape of a band on stage wasn't as entertaining as seeing them live.
Hmm.
So music videos gave a way to present the comedy or the music in a different way. And I think for me, that's kind of the difference that you're seeing
Yeah.
with these online shows.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think, it will be great to get back to live comedy. I think too, I love your music analogy, because I'll say that with all the branding and different promotional things, once I started producing my own show, I would say I probably took more inspiration from how from how independent musicians promote their careers as opposed to stand-up comedians. That's why
Mhm.
like all the venues I use now, like with Rivoli and Cameron House, like they're music venues.
Yeah.
And even the idea of like building up your own, mailing lists and just promoting yourself and always having your face first and like, you know, like bigger
That's
than the
what.
marquee of the location. It is very music based for sure. Is where I take my inspiration.
Do you think uh, how much of this online format of comedy is going to survive when the venues reopen? Do you think it's going to?
I think the world has changed for sure in that it's taught people how to use their their microphones and their cameras in a way they didn't before. And I think there are great things that have come out. Like you said, with your game show format, there's just things that really translate well, and in some ways translate even better to the digital medium than to a live show. And I do think those will survive. I think the ones where it's more, an exact copy of the live show where, whenever you're watching, you're just wishing it was live.
Yeah.
I think those will probably go away. Like you said, with music videos, you've got to show something other than people just being on stage.
Hmm.
So I think those will go away. But if it's a format where it actually works better digitally, I think that's what'll survive for sure.
That's a great words. Um, Last night I had probably the easiest sleep of my life. Uh, Felt a lot more confident with
Oh yes.
everything that has happened in this past year.
Oh.
With from George Floyd, Black Lives Matter,
Mm-hmm.
COVID, the COVID response, our southern neighbors, like getting to that edge. How do you feel?
I definitely also feel quite relieved. It was, you know what? I'll preface this by saying, please, nobody, please don't cancel me for saying some of these these views. Um, but it's like this whole year, it's wow. I, I I'm trying to find a way of saying it without being canceled, but I think with my viewpoint, maybe I'll give this background. I grew up with a lot, like I said, in poverty, with a lot, like facing a lot of systemic oppression. And when I first started my comedy, like I said, I used to do humor arts conferences. So I grew up with like a lot of anger toward white people. Like I'll just say it flat out. Like it's just you just have this anger. My very first comedy sketch was actually called "I Hate White People." It was in Calgary, so it is what it is. And it was performed in
So it was deserved. Okay. Uh,
no, but it was performed. So my rule is always. I know I'm kind of meandering a bit, but I do want to give this preamble before I go into my other things, so I don't get canceled. But I had like this resentment. Um, and my rule was always, if you're going to make fun of a certain type of people, I would only do it in a show in front of those people. So like I Hate White People was a show for an all white audience in Calgary. It was
mhm,
just this whole thing. So it's a little bit different than if you're making fun of them when they're not in the room. It
mhm.
was a satire anyway. So I had all of this anger. So for me, when Donald Trump first came to power, a weird thing I'll tell you is I didn't have the same type of sadness as a lot of people, because in a lot of ways it was just exposing the world to how I already felt. And if anything, the fact that half the country voted for Hillary, or more than half, like, here, I'll put it this way. What I said to my friends when Donald Trump was a candidate was, what I said was, there's all these stories saying people are voting for Donald Trump in spite of the fact that he's a white supremacist. They're like, but they want the other policies, they're willing to ignore his white supremacy, all this stuff. And I always said, I was like, no, it's a feature, it's not a bug. They're voting for him because he's racist. Like, don't get it twisted. So when he actually won and half the country voted for Hillary, I was actually hopeful, because I was like, I thought all white people were racist
Or
and
racist.
I was only half right. So it was like this weird kind of awakening. And I feel like with George Floyd and all the things with the police, it just felt like I had those conversations with people in the past, and particularly with the LGBT community has had a very raw relationship with the police. Even before the Black Lives Matter, with George Floyd happened, we had the Black Lives Matter protest at the Pride Parade in Toronto Pride.
Mm-hmm.
I think like 2 years before that. So, the idea of like police as an occupying force as opposed to police being there to help you, and how those feelings were different whether you're in a racialized minority or whether you're white. Like, I had always had those feelings. So my eyes weren't open. In some ways, I was happy because
Yeah.
now I could talk to people and people weren't saying I was like this crazy person. I was like, no, I was like, this is what I've been saying for like my whole life. And people couldn't understand that anger that I first came out with when I was young and I was translating into comedy. And like I said, my first sketch was I Hate White People. Like, people just didn't understand where this was coming from. And they're like, why do you hate police? Why do you hate? And I was like, I don't hate it, but I was like, there's these things happening that unless you're poor and gay or a minority, like, you're just not getting it. And there's so much anger, but when people don't even believe you, it just propels you to more anger. And what I've always said is like, I don't need people to like, be ashamed that they're white or feel bad that they're white. All people are asking is like, just believe us when we say that like police are an occupying force in our neighborhood. They're not there to protect us. Like, like when people were, here's another example. I know I'm kind of meandering, but here's another example with police is like in the queer community, when we had that serial killer
Yeah.
in Toronto hunting gays. I'm telling you, the gay community was screaming at police for like at least a decade. I'll tell you, like, I've got a lot of brown friends who are gay, and they had stopped going on dates for like at least for years because there was like, there's a serial killer hunting down gay brown people, and everybody
Yeah.
just ignored it. But trust me, in the village, people are not ignoring it. So I'm just preambling this to let people know where my mindset was when Trump first got into office. So it wasn't like, oh shit, whole world's going to hell. It was more like, now like the underbelly's been revealed. Like, this is how things have been, and now at least we can talk about it, because
Mm.
I felt so like a lot of my early comedy was confrontational because I had to snap people out of it to be able to talk about it. So going back to that sketch where with the I Hate White People, what that was in Calgary, um, a very famous quote. Almost all Calgarians say it, not to lump them all together, but at least at the time, they would always say, "Oh, there's no such thing as racism. We're totally past that. We've solved it." Um, and so you couldn't even get into like discussions about it because they wouldn't even recognize it was real. And for me, I always said that's like the most dangerous kind of racist are the ones who won't even like
Acknowledge.
acknowledge its existence. Like, I always give the example of like, the worst kind of misogynists are the ones who are like, why is there a women's movement? Like, there is equality. Why? So it's like, not acknowledging is even worse. So for me, the I Hate White People was like, okay, you're saying there's no racism, so I'm going to be really racist toward white people, and then you yell at me, call me a chink, and then I'm like, okay, now we can talk. Now, like, I'm trying to draw out.
Yeah.
I did that sketch to draw out the racism because it was so there, but they wouldn't admit it. And so with the Trump era, I feel like at least it's drawn out. I don't have to explain to people that these things exist. I don't have to explain my anger, and now we can like have these discussions. And
Mm.
now, was that worth the whole world going to hell and insurrection and all that craziness and whatever Trump's doing? I don't know, but I'll say for me, it was less about opening my eyes and more about, okay, people have finally woken up. so we can actually have a real conversation about the world um, as opposed to what we were pre-Trump. And I actually think Trump was good because like the first version of Trump could have been less crazy and he probably would have gone away with it. Like he's just crazy enough to say what he's actually thinking like into a microphone, so you just can't even fake it. Like I remember I was having this thing where you know um and it was with several comedians. I try not to argue with comedians, but sometimes it's hard to do. um and I was saying Trump was being really racist toward China. I was like, this is really some racist ass shit. And then they were like, no, 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 no. He's just, like plausible deniability, like, no, that ban on Chinese, whatever. He's just weird with health. But then he would come out and say, call it like the Kung flu and stuff. And then nobody could say he's not racist at that point. So I think what I like about Trump is he's so not savvy about his racism. And I think most of the really bad racists are more savvy. So it's like, it's good that he was so awful at hiding it that people can't pretend anymore. And if that's his legacy, then, you know, I'm kind of okay that the whole world kind of burned down for 4 years because it was also burning down people's perceptions. If that makes sense. That had
Do
nothing to do with comedy, but that's how I feel about Trump.
do you remember Patton Oswalt's routine about homophobes?
No.
About it's not just the language that people use, but you listen to not just how they say it, but what they say. And then he
Mm.
gives two examples, and one is person who uses all the proper language, saying but it comes out with basically an anti-gay marriage stance,
Mm-hmm.
and then he does like a New York taxi driver type accent, using all the wrong words,
Mm.
and but he comes out like let them get married, like
Yeah.
let them get married if they want to be married, let them do this. Why can't they raise kids,
Yeah.
and all that, whereas the person who's saying all the right words wasn't. So it's
Yeah.
we need to kind of listen to people's hearts, and Trump put that black and coal piece of shit heart out there for everyone to sort of
Yeah.
um
The funny thing is, he was such a caricature. I was telling people that these are the types of people that I was dealing with, and nobody would believe me for so long. And they're always like, Vong, why are you so angry? Why would you do a show called I Hate White People? Why are you so angry at the world? And I was like, well, now with Trump, now nobody questions it because it's like,
yeah,
he's just
yeah,
so open. I will say too, like I don't want to get too hard on Trump supporters because yeah, I'll admit something because I grew up where I grew up. Like a lot of people have a lot of difficulty understanding why visible minorities or poor people support Trump. I'll say this: during my college years, I used to like listen to Rush Limbaugh, right wing media, all that. So I do have a bit of an idea of like where. And sometimes now I'll go on Fox News just to see how they're covering it totally differently.
mm,
And I'll say it's like, I don't think all Trump supporters are racist. I think what it is it's like when you're going through it, when you're poor and you have no hope, the last thing you want to think about is systemic oppression. Like you just don't. The message that's going to resonate for you is, individual responsibility. The world is equal. There aren't these oppressive systems holding you back.
mm,
It all is on your shoulders, whether you make it or not. And that, like, I'll say until I made it out of the ghetto, that is the message that resonated because you just can't think about all the barriers and systemic oppression holding you down until you're out of the system. You know
mm,
what I mean? So for people, like, that's why I don't want to like shit on all Trump supporters because I do think they're looking for hope. And, you know, if somebody's saying the world is 100% equal and it all just depends on what you put out there, there's no other factors. That's actually a nice thing to hear when you actually are the lowest of the low. Because if you just start to think of everything that goes against you, if I took any of my brain power when I was like growing up to think about how much better off other people were, I never would have made it out of there.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, if that opens up people's eyes to why minorities might listen to a dictator like Trump, hopefully that helps. That's what they're selling. They're actually selling the American dream of the world is equal, which is helpful in when you're in that situation.
I my ex-wife, who I'm still friends with, I'm just going to clarify that one before we go on. She did not understand my dislike of Trump way back before he even talked about politics. And she was born in Uganda, came to Canada as a refugee. She's of East Indian descent, and she's just going, but like he's so funny, he's entertaining. I'm going, don't, like it. Look at the atmosphere he breathes around him, and it's
Yeah.
so destructive. But yeah, it's. I like your take that okay, this gives us a chance to have a dialogue.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe people who are willing to overlook racism um, are secretly not even secretly like don't even understand that they themselves are racist. Uh,
Yeah.
but the way you put it there about coming from a place of poverty where with your experiences growing up, that that call that call to action that they had getting from Trump to and that rallying cry making them feel that they're special. I can see how that can um, that could be
Yeah.
affecting them, giving them that little hope, so they ignore that part of his message. Um,
Yeah, and like I said, that's only some of them. I will say too, like I said, the racism is a feature, not a bug for for a lot of his
yeah,
supporters, where they're supporting him because of it, not even looking past it.
yeah,
One thing I will say too, in regards to racism, and I hope this resonates with, um, a more mainstream crowd because I'm not sure people in North America or I'll just put it, the white people they don't understand almost anywhere else in the world being called racist is not like a huge thing. Like
mm,
try it, go call an Asian racist and they'll probably be like, yeah, obviously everybody is. And I feel like we need like North Americans to get to that point where it's like if somebody's called racist, like just chill out. Like literally, it's not an insult to in almost anywhere in the world. Like I said, go call a Chinese person racist and they'll just laugh at you. Like it's just
mm,
like okay, and what? Like it's just let's just start from that place where we can talk about it, where like even using the terms racism or racist and these things are like they're such hot cold topics. Like in Calgary, if somebody's called a racist, like they'll just blow up like you
mm,
just it killed their family member. It's like the worst thing you'll probably call somebody. And it's like because I've grown up in different cultures, I know in other cultures that's like a starting point. Like um okay, fine, yeah, we're all racist and now let's talk about it. And I will
mm,
say too, like and somewhat controversially, I know like with different communities within the comedy community, I do think, yeah, I'll put it this way. Obviously, I'm a very progressive thinker, and I'm gay, I'm Asian, I'm an immigrant, but I started out my comedy in Alberta, and I would say probably quite a few of those comedians were not quite a few, but more than zero were like white supremacists, but we still work together.
mm.
I know that sounds funny, but it's like you can still find common ground even with people that like because like we kind of got to this point where I could like scream at you and I just because I'm just so forward, I was just like, okay, I hate your white supremacist ass. And they're like, well, I hate you too. And then we just go do a show and then we'd be like friendly after. And it's just like, I don't know how we get to a point where you could just call people out on shit and it's like, it's not the end of the world. Like, I don't even know how to put this. Like, I don't know. And I will say this is why I said I really appreciated my time in Alberta because where I grew up, everybody kind of had the same mentality because we all grew up together. And I actually actively chose to go to Alberta because it was the most different type of thinking I could imagine in Canada because I wanted my views challenged. And to be able to be in an industry that was dominated by like straight white guys, um, and to still find, that camaraderie, even though we really disagreed on quite a few things and our backgrounds were totally different. I do think there's a way to completely disagree with somebody and even call them white supremacists and still
Have a
go
dialogue.
for dinner. And I know that sounds weird, but it's like, I'm pretty sure you can think of some of these comedians I'm talking
I,
about out of
uh,
Alberta. And like, I'm actually strangely friends with some of the most extreme ones because I flat out told them, you're a racist ass bitch. And then they almost appreciate it. They're like, okay,
you see me for who I
let's go
am.
grab a
Yeah.
burger. Yeah. So it's sort of like,
But at
uh,
least we're not vegetarians, right?
yeah.
Uh,
I'll be like, you're a racist ass bitch, but I do
it,
like your comedy. You are sometimes funny. So
I
it's I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It's yeah. I
you
think
you
yeah.
sorry, you had mentioned earlier that you were careful with how you were phrasing things because you were afraid of being canceled. I know that was kind of like half joking at the same time. Uh, I I I I believe canceling is kind of can be necessary in the most extreme cases, but
Hmm.
automatically canceling somebody without at least attempting a dialogue, I think is not conducive. It is not conducive for growing humanity in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. It's funny with this whole canceling. So first of all, I think you know I'm of two minds of it. On one mind, I do think right now the traditional straight white male comedians are maybe focusing it on it a little bit too much. Like every Netflix special from the past 2 years is talking about how it's hard to be a comedian. And I'm like, that's just boring. I don't want to
Yeah.
hear, another comedian's views about how hard it is to be a comedian. Like just shut up and be funny. Like I know
Yeah.
it sounds mean, but like stop making jokes about how hard your life is being a comedian. Like I'm
Mhm.
just over it. But on the other hand, I do agree with what you're saying on being canceled and different things. Like, because I'm so forward with my views on a lot of things, is not just like right wingers that I upset. A lot of times I'll upset like my more left wing friends from the
Mhm.
human rights community. Um, like, and this doesn't sound really like inside baseball and a tiny thing, but like I was against the boycotting of Mulan. And I know it sounds like really silly, but like, oh my God, Paul, because my audience is like 80% Asian, the amount of drama, because so what my viewpoint was I was like, okay, first of all, Mulan is a Disney production. And, my thing was, I thought it was like performative. So I'm very pro Hong Kong. Obviously, for Hong Kong democracy, we covered a lot on the Rice Show. We are very outspoken against communist China. And I won't say which, but one of our hosts is even banned from ever going back to China for the rest of their lives because of comments they've made against the Chinese government.
Mhm.
So, but then when I said I wasn't for boycotting Mulan, because I thought it's performative, and if you actually want to help Hong Kong, like do something more than not watching a movie and then posting about how righteous you are for not watching a movie. I was like, all you're doing is you're hurting Asian creatives because finally Hollywood is investing in Asians. And if every Asian movie we put out gets boycotted, they're not going to invest in us anymore. So
Mhm.
you're not hurting the Chinese government, you're hurting Asian creatives. And I just thought, I'm not for performative bullshit. Like there's other ways you can help Hong Kong. And I thought it was like a simple statement. Oh my God, Paul, no. These I've been called a communist. I've been called, people have been saying I'm pro genocide because I'm not supporting the Uyghurs because I watch Mulan. And I'm like, okay, people, if you really think you're doing shit because you didn't watch Mulan and you're posting about it because you're such a good person because you didn't watch one movie, like, no, just stop. Just stop. I'm not going to give you that pass. Like you've actually changed the world so you didn't watch a fucking movie. So there is this idea of like jumping on, and then like literally I was just being hunted for like probably a whole month. Anything I would post, they'd be like,
Mhm.
"Oh, but you're pro genocide," and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like there's nuance. Yeah,
How many of these people are going to Walmart? How many of these people are buying things that are not made locally? Like they're supporting the communist government in China far more than one ticket for Mulan.
yeah. Like I said, my whole point was just don't
Yeah.
be performative. Like I also like people don't know this, but I have never signed a petition for anything because, and for most of my life I didn't even vote because I said the way I'm going to change the world is I'm going to start Comedy Cares, and if something I really care about, I'm going to raise money and do something about it. And then the amount of people who got on me for, you know, or like feeling superior because they signed a petition, and I was like I don't need to justify what I do in my life of how I
Mhm.
contribute to the world. But just because you sign a piece of paper to think you've actually made a change, or you didn't watch a movie and now you're superior to other people because you actually did something. But back to the cancellation thing, I will say, like, the thing is for me with cancel culture is is I'm never, and it sounds like I'm sort of speaking both sides out of my mouth. First, complaining about people who are complaining about cancel culture, and then complaining about people who are trying to cancel me. But what I'm
Yeah.
trying to what I'm trying to say is, if you believe in what you're saying, then that's all that matters. I put out there what I believed in, and if they want to cancel me, then cancel me. And for me, that's a sign of a real artist, not going out there and complaining about how hard it is and how you
Mm.
can't say what you want to say because people are going to cancel you. It's like, no, do you believe in it strongly enough to be canceled? And maybe if you don't, then don't say it. But then also don't spend all your time complaining. Like
Yeah.
I'm okay
That's
that yeah.
yeah. That's just a passive aggressive way of saying it.
Yeah.
But yeah, continue. Sorry to interject.
No, I was gonna say, like, for me, anything in my comedy, I guess for me with cancel culture, I just feel like, and this is more specific to my style of comedy. It doesn't apply to all styles of comedy, but for me, I say what I mean and I believe in everything I'm saying on stage. I know there's different types of comedy that aren't that, like you exaggerate your thoughts and stuff. But for me, everything I say on stage is something I believe in. So if you're offended and you want to cancel me, then you wouldn't agree with me in real life anyway. And I stand by what I say. So I never live in fear of being canceled because, as you can see in this interview, like people can ask me anything about anything I've ever said, and I'll strike up a conversation. I'll, give you more perspective on it because I actually believe in it. And I think as long as you believe in it, you shouldn't be worried about being canceled. Um, as an
You sound
artist,
like my
anyway.
dad. You sound like my dad. My dad has always said, if you don't want to be embarrassed by anything you've done, don't do anything that'll embarrass you.
Yeah.
Uh, which is, you just paraphrased my dad on that one. Um, uh,
Shout
Vong,
outs to Paul Dad.
yeah, rest in peace. This has been an amazingly fun interview. I've had fun. Have you had fun?
Oh yeah,
Please say yes.
this has
Okay.
been great. This has
All
absolutely been great. Yeah.
right. At Vong Show on Twitter and Instagram, and vongshow.com is how
Yeah.
you can look and follow Vong. And the Twitter, go to the at Vong Show on Twitter to support Tim Connolly. Find out about other comedy cares that Vong produces. I'm just going to very quickly put up my Twitter and Instagram, just running along the bottom. If anyone wants to find out more about any of my other shows, but we are past 93 minutes on this show. This has been a great fun, Vong. For those of you who like comedy, find the new YouTube channel and subscribe, or you can follow Paul Ash Comedy on Facebook, and that'll direct you to the right YouTube channel. Thank you to all the audience members. Thank you, Vong. Do you have any last words that you want to share with us?
Last words. I don't know. I feel like I've been talking pretty. Sometimes people say that I don't breathe when I talk, so it's a hard interview because I don't breathe for a moment for the host to even jump in. I apologize for that. I think it's like being a stand up comedian. I'm used to a captive audience that can't go anywhere, so I just talk nonstop. But no, I guess my message is, is gonna sound weird, but try and find the silver lining of what happened in the Trump era, and don't just pretend it didn't happen and feel like we're going back to normal, because if that happens, we're just going to get a worse Trump, somebody who's just more adept. Like, just really see it, if not the way I see it, then maybe try and understand the perspective that the anger and the hurt and the confusion you're feeling from the Trump era is how a lot of visible minorities have felt their whole lives. And now that your eyes are open to it, don't just pretend it didn't happen. Don't just think it's Trump and now things can go back to normal. Just hold on to how that feels, and maybe have it propel you to more understanding of how other people have felt. Like I said, I've felt the way people felt during Trump and Black Lives Matter for my whole life. So if you can kind of take that and learn from the last 4 years instead of just pretending it didn't happen, I think that would be the most important message.
Thank you very much, Vong. Thank you, audience, for tuning in or watching this on replay. I've been Paul Ash, and with me has been Vong Show.